Okay, very briefly, I want to show you the abdominal muscles, external abdominal oblique coming off the rib cage over towards the tuberococci. All the muscular parts coming down, descending like so. And then ventral midline of this animal would come up like this. And that, once again, and that caudal-free border right there, that was our inguinal ligament. You will actually get to see that in the horse from the inside of the pelvic cavity once we've cut the abdominal walls off. And once again, you'll have an inguinal canal down here, and we won't spend much time with that. I just wanted to put that superficial inguinal ring there for you so you don't wonder where it went. So external abdominal oblique is right there. External abdominal oblique. Next one down, internal, was to that one is the internal abdominal oblique. And that muscle, same fiber direction as it was in the dog, comes off the tuberococci, comes down to that last rib in the costal arch. Most of it being cranioventral, whereas this was caudoventral. Cranioventral, once again, kind of swings on down. A little bit of it is going to swing back like so. And then again into an aponeurosis like this. And then finally the transversus abdominis. That is coming off of the transverse process of the lumbar vertebra transversely. You would see it back here as it overlaps the inside of the back of the rib cage and comes down like so, and it will send its aponeurosis deep to the rectus abdominis. So rectus abdominis is coming off of the xiphoid cartilage and the xiphoid process, which is the last sternobra. I won't ask you about that. Comes through here like so. So rectus abdominis is right there. And this transversus would send its aponeurosis deep to that as part of that deep rectus sheath. So those, once again, just like the dog, find those on the cut cross sections. One thing I want to point out, this right here on your internal abdominal oblique, that is the dorsal border of your internal abdominal oblique that's going to help delineate what we're going to call the paralumbar fossa, this little triangular depression right there. So don't draw that triangle on your horse right there. Just keep in mind that's the dorsal border of that muscle that we will come back to in just a second. Looking at the back end of the right side of a horse, and in talking about the flank and paralumbar fossa, when you're visualizing this on the animal, we mentioned the dorsal border will be the tips of the lumbar transverse processes. That's this kind of rigid tissue right here where they're bulging out. So dorsal border is there. The ventral border is a horizontal line through the level of the stifle. Here's the point of our knee right here, kind of even with the bottom of the belly right there. And then the cranial border is the last rib, and the ribs are here. You can barely see this on your picture. It should show up a little better when you have this in your hand. The last rib will come down like so and stop up high, and then the costal arch. So the costal cartilage that comes off that will feed into that costal arch right there. So those are the three boundaries that you have of your paralumbar fossa. And then this line here is the cranial border of the hind limb. So that's actually a separate structure right there. And so when you have the hind limb drawn in there, now you have our flank delineated there on the side of the horse. So no bony structures between you and the organs in the abdominal cavity at that point. Now, the paralumbar fossa is this depression at the dorsal aspect of your flank. And if you remember from those abdominal muscles I just showed you, the internal abdominal oblique will come off of that tubercocci and come down towards that costal arch, last rib, and down towards the linea alba like so. And so that dorsalmost border of that muscle is right there. And so here is our paralumbar fossa, that little triangular depression there. Here's the list of GI structures, the tubular system as it goes through the animal that I sent out to you yesterday. I'm going to kind of talk about some of these things as they go down. The esophagus, nothing really special about that, easy to find. The stomach, once again, that will have different components to it. We have the initial part is the cardia. We have a body. We have a pylorus. And if you remember, that little portion off towards the left of the dog stomach was called the fundus. That was this little portion that curved off here like so before it kicked back into the body, into the pylorus there, so kind of to the left of where the esophagus would come in. Well, the horse, that right there is extremely large. And it comes on over here like this, and then the pylorus is almost up. I'm sorry. Extremely large right there. Esophagus in here, pylorus over there. These two tubes coming out of it are almost side by side, so there's almost no lesser curvature there. Because this fundic area is so large, they call this the saccus cecus. So blind in sac, that is the saccus cecus. That will be a new structure for the horse. So that's what we call it instead of the fundus. So cardia was up in there. Saccus cecus is this area over here. Body's right there. And those divisions of the pylorus are over here. So saccus cecus on the stomach. The other thing that I want to point out on the stomach of the horse, this is the stomach right here. This is a half stomach. Esophagus was coming in here. Here is this big, gigantic saccus cecus over here, and it kicks into the body, and we come over here, and here's the pylorus there. So you can see there's not much of a lesser curvature there, just like we drew over here. Inside the horse stomach, there is a glandular region, like the dog had, and an aglandular region. So the aglandular region, so no glands, not glam, a glandular region. The aglandular region is mostly within the saccus cecus. So if I turn this over this direction, you can see the difference. Here is that dark mucosal covering of the glandular portion of the stomach, just like the dog had. Over here in this big wide saccus cecus, here's the aglandular portion over here. We are actually looking at the tunica muscularis, the muscular part of the stomach right there. There is keratinized material over the top of this right here, a stratified squamous, because we don't want the muscle being eaten away by gastric juices, but there is no mucosa over this. So there is the aglandular portion of the stomach, glandular portion over here towards the body and pylorus. The margo plicatus, it doesn't show up too well here. The margo plicatus, you will see that term in your dissection guide, and I'll write it down here. The margo plicatus, that is the border between these two regions of the stomach, and it's usually a raised ridge. You can't see it here, but you'll be able to see this in your horses. That's a division between the glandular and aglandular stomach. Okay, so here's our stomach in this diagram. From the stomach, we enter the cranial duodenum. There'll be a cranial duodenal flexure, a descending duodenum, a caudal duodenal flexure around the craniomesenteric artery at 17, and then an ascending duodenum. Okay? There's going to be something different in the horse. Let's go backwards. Ascending duodenum's here, caudal duodenal flexure. The descending duodenum's here. Cranial duodenal flexure has to be that point there, but there's another bend right here, and then we get to the pylorus. So this bend right here is between the pylorus and the cranial duodenal flexure, so that is our cranial duodenum. but it's not a straight little piece like it was in the dog. The dog almost didn't have much there. There's an extra bend here, and this little bend is what we're calling the sigmoid loop. Over here, cranial duodenum, parentheses, sigmoid loop. What has happened in the horse, if you think back to the dog, had a stomach shaped about like this. Esophagus in here, pylorus out there, cranial duodenum flexure, descending duodenum. And it sat like this in the dog. The dog is laying on its back on the table. Now we're going to flip this over because the horses, as we're looking at them, they're standing up. So this is going to be this aspect, and we're looking at the dorsal part of the stomach. So this is how it sits in the horse, just about. We still got to do one more thing to it. So you can still see cranial duodenum flexure, descending duodenum, but in the horse, this is headed caudally, but the stomach is thrown forward like this. It will sit like this, and the esophagus is going to be bent over in that direction. So that greater curvature, instead of being directed caudally, is directed kind of cranioventral. And so we get a bend in our cranial duodenum, so we end up with two bends here. Here's still our cranial duodenal flexure where it should be, but now there's another bend. And in the horse, this bend comprises the entire cranial duodenum. The cow and the ruminant, the goat and sheep, are going to have a little bit more cranial duodenum before this bend right here. So this bend is called the sigmoid loop. The second one is your cranial duodenal flexure. Now it's strange, they call this the sigmoid loop. Sigmoid means S-shaped, but it really takes both of these to make the S. This is really a U shape or a C shape, okay? But they call it the sigmoid loop. So that is the cranial duodenum of the horse. All of it's been into this little C-shaped piece here, sigmoid loop, then cranial duodenum, then descending. So that's what's going on here. So we've just gone from this to the dog to that in the horse. So that's where we get our sigmoid loop from. Coming down this, once we get up through the ascending duodenum, it would drop into the jejunum, and that's what's coming back out over here. It just kind of snuck behind all this, comes over here. Here's all our jejunum right there. This just got cut off in the picture. Don't worry, he's not dead. It's just not in the picture here. And it comes back over here, jejunum up through there, and we get to this point here. Ileum's the next thing, and you can see it's not labeled in the picture, but here is the little ileocecal fold right there. So if you remember your antimesenteric ileal artery, we'll talk about this later. The horse doesn't have it, but they still have that fold of tissue that we didn't give a name to in the dog, but it really stands up nicely in the horse. So ileocecal fold, and that will tell you where your ileum begins, so it will run from that portion over towards the midline of this picture. We can't see it happen here. If you come back to this sheet here, it goes from ileum, there'll be a little ileal orifice, and then into the cecum. Okay, this did not happen in the dog. We went from the ileum into the ascending colon, and the cecum was off to the side, and you had to come back into the ascending colon through the transverse and on down. The cecum is in line this time, okay? So this ileal orifice, that's a common name for it. It's really the ileocecal orifice. The dog did not have that because those two structures did not touch on the dog, but we will go with ileal orifice. That's fine. So if when you go from the ileal orifice into the cecum, you're actually entering the base of the cecum. And then you will go down to the body, to the apex of the cecum, which is the dead end. And you go from the apex back to the body to the base to continue on down this list. So when you take a look at this cecum, it's this big, looks like a little embryo-shaped structure here. So the base of the cecum is this big area right up in here. That's the base. The body is this chunk down here, and the apex is this free end down here, this last chunk there. So when you're talking about the cecum, you have to talk about base, body, or apex. Be specific. We will talk about the base, and this is all throughout vet medicine and for the rest of your lives. For those of you in large animal, you'll be talking about the base of the cecum, and you'll be talking about the apex of the cecum very, very, very often. Okay, body doesn't come in a whole lot. These other two ends will come up quite a bit. So from the cecum, you enter in the horse, you can see here, we'll go through the cephalocoelic orifice into the right ventral colon, from there to a sternal flexure, to left ventral colon, to pelvic flexure, to left dorsal colon, to diaphragmatic flexure, right dorsal, and then a transverse colon. In the dog, what was between the cecum and the transverse colon? That little bitty ascending colon, just a little bitty straight part, about an inch long. All of this is the ascending colon of the horse. All of that's the ascending colon. So when you take a look at this right here, from the base of the cecum, you drop into the right ventral colon, sternal flexure, left ventral colon, pelvic flexure, left dorsal colon, diaphragmatic flexure, right dorsal colon, transverse colon, and what was after that in the dog? Descending colon, and there it goes right there, into the rectum and in the anus. So that's how this goes. You've got a picture that has the legend on it as well, so you can watch that. And so I'm going to show you exactly how this will sit in the horse. You've got some diagrams, but I'll kind of show this to you in another fashion.